Hey, everybody, it's Chris Widener, and you're watching Awakened Nation with Brad Szollose. And today we're talking about revival.
A huge shift is taking place on planet Earth. People seem to be waking up. Tired of the way things used to be, they are creating something brand new and changing the world we live in. My name is Brad Szollose, and I get to sit down with the next generation of idea makers, the disruptors, and the game changers. Everyday people, just like you and me, from all over, who are doing amazing things to Awakened Nation. A good friend of the show, at least I believe he's a good friend of the show, because Chris, you've been on 3 times now, and I love talking to you. We've met in person many, many times, and your message is just so needed in this day and age. Every book you have ever written, I think it's at 25 or 26 at this point. It's inspirational. So thank you again for being on Awakened Nation, my friend.
Thanks for having me. And I am a friend of the show.
I figured, because I can talk to you. I send emails sometimes and I recommend some things. And I think I said the last time you were like, should I watch this, Brad? What is this? And I said, I would never, ever send you something that wasn't worth watching. And you went right in, you go, yeah, this is good. So thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to have an extraordinary conversation today about God. And Chris has written an extraordinary book, and I really look forward to this. And Chris, you know how I am. It's the tagline that really is where the meat is. Wouldn't you agree on your books?
Yeah. Taglines are always really good because you kind of want something snappy, right? And then your tagline is really what it is. It's really what the book is about. And so the name of the book is The Coming American Revival. And the subtitle, what's interesting about the title, we're kind of getting some publisher weeds here. The problem with the title is that some people think that I'm talking about America, the country, being revived. And the coming American revival is not about America getting revived, the country. It's about the revival that is coming to America, to the people of America. So it's not about the country necessarily being revived, although I think it will if we experience revival, but it's about the need for the people of America to experience that spiritual revival. And so the subtitle is The Biblical Blueprint for Igniting a Nation's Soul. And that's really what I believe we need. I think that even though we have churches on every corner, I'm not really convinced that those churches are doing a whole lot to make our country better. And we need to see personal revival. We need to see church revival. And the only way that we'll see national revival is if we see personal and church revival. So it's a book about revival and what it looks like to be drawn back to God and have that kind of relationship with God.
I love how you start the book, because a lot of people, they stop teaching this in our school system. And you know this, Chris. That America changed the planet Earth. Before America, royalty ran everything. They told you what to do, when to sit, what and how to think. And America was the middle finger to these emperors, Caesars, pharaohs, and ruling class. Basically, our Declaration of Independence was a memo to the main office and a big FU to them to say, this is over. And I love how you begin this in the book, because it does touch on our founding fathers. And it says, America sits in a precarious place. The once mighty, greatest country in the world is broken and fractured. Division is rampant, driven by nefarious forces of evil, seeking to destroy a country that once stood as a city on the hill, brightly lighting up the world with the hope of Jesus, freedom, and justice. Let's start there. What do you think has gone wrong in 247 years?
I'll tell you, it's really interesting when I think about the history of America, started by men and women who wanted a place where they could worship freely, where they could be self-determining. They threw off the shackles of a king. Galatians, in the book of Galatians, chapter 5, verses 1, and then I think it's verse 13, talk about how we have been created to be free. And it says,
Yeah.
for freedom, you've been set free. Do not allow yourself to be shackled again by the burden of slavery. And so Christian men and women started our country. We've had lots of blips and ups and downs over the course of time. Probably the biggest mark on our country's history was slavery. However,
Yeah.
what I always point out is that America was at the forefront of ending slavery. And the reason
Yeah.
we ended slavery was because Christian men and women realized it wasn't right. And
Right.
so, if you really want to watch somebody's head explode, say, do you want to know who ended slavery? White, wealthy, Republican Christian men.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we drove it worldwide to end slavery. And so we've always been a nation that is driven by Christian morals and principles.
Yeah.
I try not to ever say we're a Christian nation because it might be arguing semantics, but nations can't be Christians.
Right.
People are Christians.
Yes.
Nations can be nations that are driven and led by Christians and Christian principles. So I try to always make that distinction. Now,
Yeah.
here's where I think we went awry. We went awry, I believe, as a nation right after World War II, because what happened was we came back and we experienced the greatest economic boom in world history. We and America flourished after World War II. And everybody moved out of the cities and they moved into suburbs and they built big homes and they built big edifices and churches and all those kinds of things. And we forgot God. I really believe that the blessing of God became the materialistic blessing of God actually became the albatross around our neck. Now, when you read the Bible, Brad, you see this all the
Yeah.
time. It's cyclical. God says, "I'm
Yeah.
going to bless you," and they say, "Thank you, God, for blessing us," and they enjoy it, and then they become consumed with it, and God goes, "Now they're consumed with the gift I gave them. I need to take the gift away so that they turn back to me."
Right.
And that's what I really think happened with America
Yeah.
was after World War II, we got enamored with things and we didn't pass our faith along to the next generation. I mean, if you look at it, the next generation after the World War II generation were the people who became the sex crazed, drug fueled hippies of the late 60s and early 70s. They didn't take the faith of their fathers.
Well, they were also easily manipulated out of it. We're now finding out the CIA was behind a lot of this. We found out last year that the CIA was directly involved in assassinating JFK. And
Yeah,
no one did anything.
yeah,
No, there was no DOJ coming down and researching anything. So I agree with you. There are cycles to nations. And this is the most fascinating part about the Bible for me. I went to Catholic school as a kid, read the Bible every day. My mom was more of a born again Christian. And so I grew up, looking into all these stories. And I said to myself one day, I shut the Bible, I'm sitting back and I go, what's the pattern here? There's a pattern to the Bible.
yeah,
And the
absolutely.
pattern is always like the person worships the Lord, then they get all the blessings, and then they turn around and go, I'm pretty awesome, and forget
Yeah,
God. Look at me, Job is a good example. And then they smite God, they hate God, they yell at God, gnashing of teeth and a fist in the air because nothing's going right, and they forgot to keep the relationship open. They
yeah.
forgot that relationship with the Almighty, good or bad, you got to talk to God. And so when they finally turned around and figured out, it's like, wait a minute, wait a minute. All my success started way back then when I was talking to God. Maybe I should get back to that. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And in a way, I like to use a human analogy because people say, well, why would God strip us of everything, in order to punish us or whatever? God's ultimate goal, I believe, the story of the Bible is that God wants to have a personal relationship with human beings. It's why he sent Jesus.
Yeah.
He's like, this world has gone absolutely nuts. I'm sending Jesus. I'm going to reconcile them to me. I'm going to take care of their sins so that we can have this relationship. But think about a father and a son, right? We all want to bless our children. So we bless our children, we buy them a game console, or we buy them something that they wanted, a baseball glove and a baseball mitt, whatever it is. They go up to their room and they enjoy it, and we feel blessed because we bless them. They love us because we gave them something that they really, really wanted. But then you say, you know what, I'd really like you to clean your room. And he goes, no way, Dad, I'm not cleaning my room. And you're like, son, I need you to clean your room. And then no, I'm not doing it, Dad. I'm not cleaning my room. Well, what do? Well, you say, okay, so here's the deal. What we're going to do is we're going to take that baseball and ball glove baseball mitt that I just gave you. We're going to put that on the shelf till you clean your room.
Right.
Why? And nobody listening to this would have a single problem with the situation that I just described.
Right.
But if God happens to hold us accountable because we've turned away from God, they go, who's God to tell me what I need to do? Well, it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it's a good analogy. God wants us to know him and love him, and he doesn't want anything to come in between us. And we get focused a lot on the gifts of God rather than the giver of the gifts. And I'll give you a good example. I learned this 30 years ago. Somebody gave me a really cool gift for my birthday one time. And I remember we were all still at the house, and I was just infatuated. It was a little like a handheld. It was like one of the first kind of Palm Pilots or something. And I was just all into this thing. And then I looked, and the person who had given it to me was sitting on the couch, just kind of like, dum-de-dum-de-dum. And I remember it hit me like a ton of bricks. I really felt like God said to me, this is like how you treat me. You're more engaged in the gift than the giver of the gift. And I remember I put it down, and I re-engaged with the person who had given me this gift. And I feel like that happens with us with God. We get wrapped up in the gifts rather than the giver of the gift. And we need to be wrapped up in the giver of the gift, and then that's when he gives more gifts.
Wow. That's why when you hear these people talk about The Secret, all this spiritual new agey stuff,
right,
they're actually working with the laws of God. They don't seem to get that. The more you lean forward and have gratitude and see the giver, see the lesson beyond the thing in front of you. That's our job, is to analyze. We should be analyzing the science of God speaking to us, because I do believe God has a secret language for each of us. And I also believe it is our job to wake up at each of these layers, this communication that's coming directly to us. So good for you. That is a powerful, powerful lesson, bro. Unfortunately, Palm Pilot went the way of the dodo bird.
Those in BlackBerry. BlackBerry could have owned the entire world, and they botched it.
Yeah. Same with Atari. Let's not. You have in here the 7 cycles, and I love this. The first cycle is they love God and serve him. 2 is he blesses them with all their blessings, which we've been touching on here. But number 3, they get fat and happy and turn from God instead of worshiping and they worship their wealth and blessings. Number 4, God strips them of their blessings to draw them back to himself, to pay attention. Hey, it's not the things. Number 5, the people fight and rebel and wallow in their sins, which we talked about. And number 6, you said we're in number 6 right now, which is tired. They finally repent and realize they have turned their backs on God. Let's talk about that. We are at that point, wouldn't you say, here in America?
Yeah, and I think really what has happened is I think Christians have woken up, and they've looked around the last 4 or 5 years, and they've seen just evil running rampant. Who would have thought even 20 years ago that drag queen story hour would be a thing? Right.
Oh,
I mean, who would have thought that so much of the sexual perversion and the drug addiction and the open borders and the open drug dens in our cities of New York and LA and Portland and San Francisco. And I think what's happening is Christians are looking around and they're going, we've lost our ever loving minds. And then the natural reaction for men and women, for human beings, is to call upon God. It's why they always say there's no atheist in a foxhole, right? Because as soon as incoming shells start, all of a sudden you're like, dear God, please help me. I'm sorry I ever rejected you. You know, I think that's what's happening now is we're going, how did this happen? This is the greatest country ever. God blessed us. Certainly not perfect, but we honored God. We helped the world. Nobody's done more for this world than the United States of America. And it was driven by Christian charity and Christian compassion. Why we sent missionaries and why we send foreign aid and why we send all of these kinds of things. And now we're looking at our own country and saying, this is horrific. God, we need you. We need your help again.
I agree with you. And we were talking about this in the green room before we got started. I have had a very interesting conversation with a good friend of mine, and she says she's not a Democrat or a liberal but she says she's confused because her entire family has called her a communist, a Marxist, a socialist. I'm none of those, but she's voting 100% in the left
She says,
camp.
I'm not one. I'm just voting for one.
Right, exactly. And I thought, how does someone stand in the illusion? Because everything she sent me about, and we'll talk about Trump today,
Sure.
everything she sent me is Trump is the next Hitler. Trump is disrespectful. Trump is all this. And I said, well, a lot of that is propaganda. You realize that there is, the more they're panicking, the more they're saying he's Hitler. Wait a minute. All I remember is for the past, when Trump was in office, all they did was burn the cities, kill people, and the news media turned around and said, these are mostly peaceful demonstrations. And they're calling the right, the conservative side, they're calling us the violent ones. I don't understand how people cannot see through the veil of illusion. Let's talk about that.
Well, you know what I'm waiting for? Because really, there's only one thing more that they could do or say to President Trump or say about President Trump. I'm waiting for CNN to bring on some expert on reincarnation, and they're going to step up and say, no, he's literally Hitler reincarnated. Like that's the only thing left, that we've been hearing for 9-10 years now, that he's a lot like Hitler and that he likes Hitler and Hitler this and Hitler that. The only thing left is for some guy to come on and go, no, I've done my research. He's literally Hitler reincarnated. Um, no, it's interesting. I had a friend a few years ago during COVID, during the lockdowns, and when I realized, and I think we all realized this is a joke. They're making stuff up. They're hoodwinking us. Whatever you want to call it. And I said to this friend of mine, he said, Chris, I said, how can they believe this? I think the one that I specifically asked him about was Joe Biden bragging about blackmailing the government of Ukraine to fire the prosecutor who was looking into his son, literally on camera bragging about blackmailing another country to fire the guy who was looking into his son. And everybody's, I don't see any problem with that. I wrote to this friend of mine who's also a Christian, and I said, I don't get it. And he said, Chris, read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It explains everything. And I probably recommend that chapter more than any other chapter of the Bible to people today to understand why people don't understand what's going on. And the chapter is basically about two things. It's about the rise of lawlessness. Well, look around and see this. Our own government is breaking the law. The border situation, an absolute just lawless. But the second one is it talked about how they didn't believe the truth. The people did not believe the truth. And it says, therefore, God sent them a powerful delusion so that they would believe the lie. God gets to a point where he kind of brushes his hands of people. I've given you every possible chance to believe this, but you're so committed to the lie that I'm going to let you believe the lie. And I really think that's where we're at, because honestly, Brad, isn't that the only explanation of how somebody can literally look at something and not believe it?
You answered it. You answered it. That is the chapter, because we've presented fact after fact, from uranium one to Barry Soetoro selling oil to Russia, to China directly influencing our politicians. It's right there in black and white. And now China's buying up tons of our farmland. Ireland last year wanted to destroy 200,000 heads of cattle just because, well, it was messing with the environment, but it never crossed their mind. Let's slaughter those cattle and sell them as food. They were just going to
Yeah.
destroy them. We're in topsy-turvy world where it's just pure craziness. And I literally cannot understand how people cannot see the truth of what's taking place. And by the way, Chris, I want to talk about this. I believe they're setting it up for Trump to win. And when he wins, they're going to burn the cities again. They're going to go crazy.
Of course they
And
will.
they're going to turn our military and our police and everybody in DC on these treasonous people. And those on the left will say, there, he's turned into Hitler, not
Yeah.
understanding that these are high treason acts. These aren't just like, oh, I made a mistake. I lost the emails. These are high treason acts of selling us out to foreign influences. Let's talk about that a little bit because I just feel these people on the left and the deep state, they don't think in terms of 4 years. They think in terms of 75 years at a
Sure.
time.
Well,
So,
if you read the old book, it was written in 1999, Robert Bork, Slouching Towards Gomorrah. And if you think about the timing of this, he talks about the 1960s and how the left, and particularly the communists, decided that they needed to take over our country. And the way to do it was through the institutions of media, schools, education, churches. Now, he writes about this in 1999, 30 years later, and you're just
right.
going, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Well, now 30 years after that, or 25 years after that, you're looking at what he was saying was absolutely true. This started in the 60s. It's culminating now. Now, listen to this. This is another theory that I have, and I think it's absolutely true. If you were 20 years old in 1970, how
Mhm.
old would you be today?
Oh,
You would be,
90,
well, no,
94.
if you were 20 years old in 1970, that
Oh,
means you were born in
74.
1950, you would be 74 years old.
Right.
Okay. So if you were between 20 and 20, if you were between 20 and 30 in 1970, and the reason I say 1970 is because that's when all the radical, leftists, God is dead, drop in, drop out,
Yeah.
whatever, Timothy
Yeah.
Leary, the whole country went to hell in a handbasket in the 1970s, which in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, which is interesting because you got a parallel thing of the Jesus people movement, which it ended up coming out Calvary Chapel and some of those
Right.
kinds of churches. But think about this. If you were between the ages of 20 and 30 in 1970, you are now between 74 and 84.
Wow.
Now, think about the leaders of the Democratic movement and ask how many of them are between 74 and 84.
Wow.
Now you realize that the people who are making these decisions are literally the radicals of 1970. And this is their last hurrah. This is their last chance to overthrow the country that they hate. John Kerry, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi,
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders,
Yeah.
all of these people who want to destroy America as you know it, they started in 1970, and they are the people who have gained all the power to actually go ahead and do it now.
That's powerful. I don't know if you know the documentary filmmaker Mickey Willis,
Yeah,
but
I met him earlier this year.
oh, I want to get him on the show. But his most recent documentary, he was working with Bernie Sanders. He was all enthusiastic, and he shows the story in his latest work. And he all of a sudden he woke up and he looked around, and everybody's red. Meaning they're communist. And he went, "Whoa, wait a minute! I've been supporting communism." And the wake up was this slap in the face, and he realized he was on the wrong side. And this kind of waking up, I admire. First of all, I admire anybody who does it. And God bless you. Don't ever feel embarrassed to walk over the line to us because we're here to hug you. We don't judge like that. We're not sitting there going, "What? You're a liberal. We're gonna," we don't do that. We kind of go, "Well, okay, you vote for who you want." And I wish everybody woke up. And I think the revival is going to do that, because it starts inside us. It isn't the nation, it starts within.
Yep.
It's the power of prayer, the having, every night before I go to bed, I think, God for everything. I mean, how could you not?
Yeah.
Even if you're an atheist, I look around, I go, oh yeah, this all happened because of an accident. All of this.
Right.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I'm sorry, I go off on tangents sometimes. Go ahead. You wanted to say something.
No, I just think it's important for us to understand that God's ultimate goal is our holiness. And so one of
Yeah.
the things that I did in the book was I basically said, what would the world look like if a revival actually happened? What would it look like in the
Yeah.
family? What would it look
Hmm.
like in business? What would it look like in politics? What would happen to politics if nobody told a lie? What
Yeah.
would happen if the politicians stopped lying to us
Yeah.
and stopped being deceitful? Because ultimately, that's what holiness looks like. It means living our lives as God would have us live our lives. And well, one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou
Yeah.
shalt not lie. What would the world look like if husbands and wives truly loved each other the way they were supposed to love each other, and were faithful to each other the way they were supposed to be faithful to each other,
Yeah.
and raise their children and discipline their children the way they were supposed to? What would happen in schools if they taught Christianity and faith and those kinds of things rather than drag queen story hour? What would business look like if all of a sudden Christian business people stopped cheating their partners, stopped overpricing their products, all of those
Yeah.
kinds of things? I always say people are so against Christianity in the marketplace, or Christianity, having any sort of effect on the way we live. But why? What are
Yeah.
we afraid of? Love one another, forgive one another, be kind to one another. Like, what are we afraid of?
I agree with you. It's like, what are we afraid of? Do you hear the jets going overhead? I was just curious.
I don't.
I live near Nellis Air Force Base. We're up in a really nice house up near the mountains here in Vegas, but the jets take off
You still
sometimes.
get some jet noise, huh? Yeah, I
Oh
didn't
my
hear it.
God, the ground rumbles over here. I wasn't sure if my mic picked it up because I turned the gain down. Um, I feel like when we step away from God, we're easily fooled, you know,
Oh,
and
for sure.
and I was been doing research on the Scofield Bible, which was put together and written by Cyrus Scofield and published by Oxford Press. And here's the weird part: that was financed by the Church of Satan, and people went, "Oh, it's a Bible. It's a Christian Bible. I love this." It's been slightly rewritten. People don't realize that, but it's
I heard
so
Tucker
easy.
talking about that a couple months ago or something.
Yeah, and I'm like, wait a minute. And then you look back into the 60s, and you and I are old enough, we were kids then, but I had an older brother who was worried about getting drafted to Vietnam. He became a hippie. He just basically gave the middle finger to the government and he said, I'm dropping out. And so part of becoming, sort of stepping away, you could have found your own sort of spiritual awakening, but instead they dropped into the lower, vices of sex and drugs and
Yep.
rock and roll and all this. And we look back and we now realize the CIA was very much involved in these things. The psychedelic movement, Aleister Crowley and all these other people. Um, they were all involved in bringing this destruction to the United States. And I have to ask this because I've talked to communists, I've talked to socialists, I've talked to people who don't seem to understand. Uh, you know, how can somebody believe in communism? How can somebody believe in socialism at this point? We've seen it fail everywhere. The disconnect we just talked about. It's flabbergasting to me. It's like telling me a combustion engine doesn't exist when it's right in front of you. You know what I mean?
Well, you answered the whole question by how you started this segment in you talking. The very first thing you said when people step away from God, they are easily led astray.
Hmm.
That's the answer to the question. And I'll say this, play a little Bible trivia. Remember when Jesus was leaving the earth, he was going to go away, and he said, I will send you the Holy Spirit, who will be a counselor to you. The Holy Spirit, designed to live inside of us. Jesus goes back to heaven, and the Holy Spirit lives inside of us. And one of the names that Jesus gives the Holy Spirit is the counselor. And so here, I think you answered your own question, Brad, is that is that when we step away from God, the counselor doesn't have our ear anymore. And so we'll believe anything because we don't have the counselor speaking to us to say, whoa, that's not good. Stay away from that. Come back over here. And you see it, you brought up socialism. And a lot of Christians have been, they hear socialism and they go, well, it's just Christianity in socialism. And the one that I loved a couple of years ago, somebody said, why is it when Jesus says to give to the poor, it's charity, but when the government says to give to the poor, it's evil socialism? And there's a really simple, easy answer to that. It's actually kind of a powerful statement on the surface, but if you have any sort of discernment, you go any deeper, it's really actually easily tossed aside. Because when Jesus tells us to give to the poor, it's out of the charitable heart. He says, let your heart be filled with compassion, give to the poor, take care of the poor, because I love you, you love others. When the government says give to the poor, they say, give us your money or you're going to jail, and then we'll give it to the poor.
Yeah.
That's the difference between socialism, which is authoritarianism, versus Christianity, which is freedom.
Right. I've tried to say, oh, by the way, thank you. I would have spent years trying to figure that out, but you showed me I answered my own question. I see people all the time, and they think government is made up of people just like them. And I think that's the mistake. Yeah, you laughed. So do I. And I think everybody,
Adam Schiff, a guy just like me.
Yeah. I think everybody should read The Prince by Nikolai Machiavelli.
Machiavelli,
yeah, because that's where we get the term Machiavellian, which is pretty brutal, hand of government on things. But he basically says in there that politicians have to pretend that they have compassion and love and spirituality, just like their constituents. But if the politician actually had those attributes, they would be destroyed because they're pretending to be your buddy. They're pretending to love you. They're pretending because they want your money. That's why it's called a bill. When they send a bill up through Congress and the Senate,
eventually we're going to have to pay that bill.
Exactly. And so 9 out of 10 times a politician is lying to you to get you to say, yeah, I'm voting for that. But if you read a little deeper into everything, you'll find that they're nefarious as heck. They're demonic. They're literally funding certain things so that they can get other things. That's how.
Well, and I'll tell you the other thing that's going on in Washington, D.C., I believe it with all my heart now. I don't have proof of it, but I believe it. I saw an interview with Madison. I don't know if it's Cawthorn or Hawthorne, but he was the young kid who got elected, youngest guy ever elected to Congress. He was in a wheelchair. And I think he got elected in 2020, if I remember right. I saw an interview with him because 2 years later, his own party primaried him and ousted him, and he was gone. And he did 2 years, and then he was gone. And I heard him being interviewed, and he said, I used to go to these parties and, all these famous politicians and people and everything. And he said, I noticed that I would be sitting there, and next thing you know, 3 of the most gorgeous, scantily clad women would be all over me. Hey, Congressman, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, so great to meet you. We think you're amazing, blah, blah, blah. And I love this kid because I think even now he's only like 26 years old or something like that. Wow. He's really young, maybe 30 at this point. But he says, look, here's the deal. I'm young and I'm moderately good looking, but I'm not Brad Pitt.
Right.
And number 2, I'm a congressman, but I'm a backbencher congressman with no power whatsoever. And number 3, I'm in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. There's no reason these 3 hot, gorgeous girls should want me to go out with them partying after the party, other than to get me into a compromising situation. And he said to the person interviewing, he said, and it happens all the time. He said, you're down there to cast your vote. Somebody will come up to you and they'll say, hey, how are you going to vote on this? And they're, well, I'm going to vote yes. Oh, well, we'd really like you to vote no. Well, I'm going to vote yes. And they go, were you at the such and such hotel last Friday night? Because I think I saw a picture of you there. Mm-hmm. And there you go. I really do believe that a lot of these people are compromised. I think a lot of the people who are coming out and supporting Kamala Harris, I think they're compromised. And of course, I don't know. I don't have any facts, but I look at a guy like Mark Cuban and I think he's not that dumb. Like Mark Cuban is not that stupid of a guy.
No, he can't.
And so then I just look and I go, what do they got on the guy?
Yeah.
What do they got on him?
It literally, Mark Cuban has been an embarrassment. I mean, I'm luckily, I have a partner in my life and she is obsessed with politics and she's supported Bernie Sanders and then realized this is crazy when they pushed Hillary in front. Yep. And the Los Angeles Times reported it a day before it happened. She realized we've been bamboozled. Yep. And I was like,
and they just did it again. They just picked another one. They picked Hillary over Bernie, and they cheated and lied to their own party, to their own faithful members, and they just did it again with Kamala. I think there are a lot of people that wanted some open primary, kinds of situations where people could throw their hat in the ring, and the powers that be behind the scenes picked her.
Yeah, I agree with you because we are being manipulated. I don't even, if people are sitting there laughing that there's a deep state, just look at the manipulation that goes on behind the scenes that creates these power structures. And I'm a firm believer, they went after, the Me Too movement. Who was it? Weinstein they went after?
Yeah, Harvey Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein. I believe he was just the front man for a bigger wave of sexual misconduct in Hollywood.
I mean, you look at Epstein. I believe that was a purposeful thing. I don't think he was just a pervert. He might have been a pervert, but I think more than that, he was an operative.
Yeah, perverts don't
get. If you could get a pervert to be an operative, well, then you've hit the mother lode, right? Yeah. I don't know if Diddy was doing it on purpose for the government, but I think he's a useful tool for them because he got a bunch of people. He might have just been doing it for business purposes,
right?
But I think now they go, oh wow, look at all these famous people he entangled.
He's the front patsy for all of this to block what really is behind all this, because
for sure.
In any other nation they would have gotten the Epstein client list out there and all of Congress would have probably been either put in jail or indicted or put through a major trial.
I think that's why you're seeing the massive meltdown now. I mean, everybody who shows up now, like they drugged John Legend out the other day. John Legend. Well, him and his wife have long been rumored, to be involved in all of that stuff. And you just look at these people coming out of the woodwork to desperately plead to not let Donald Trump become the president.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're all going to jail for what they did.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've seen in the news media for the past 50 years, I'll see a crime that was committed and I'm like, finally, they can go after this person. And I realize they won't, because it will bring down a full system or a full structure or look at the tobacco industry. They refuse to look at the data, and the tobacco industry created their own non-data just to fight all this. And you see it everywhere. You see it in politics. You see it in the food industry. You see it at the FDA level. And I truly believe they cannot bring you the truth. Let's talk about, the thing we cannot talk about from 2020. That was obviously someone influenced that, thing where everybody showed up to vote on something. I'm not going to mention it because YouTube will shut me down for this. I mean, imagine that. We're living in a free country and I can't talk about this. And I've talked about it with auditors in our state. Okay. And so we see this everywhere where it stops at a certain point. The justice system just stops like a hard wall of brick and mortar and steel. And suddenly no one's going past it because I truly believe it'll bring down not only the country, but it will expose everyone.
Well, that's
Do you
what they've
believe
been
it?
saying. They've been saying when these lists come out, it's going to be, horrific. I've got to think that Trump and those guys know who was on the Epstein list, but I don't know. Maybe I heard somebody once, they said, "Where is the Epstein booklet? Like, where is the actual booklet?" And
Yeah.
they said it's probably in a safe in Christopher Wray's office.
Yeah.
You know, and very, 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 very well protected.
It's just like the last Indiana or the first Indiana Jones movie where there's this warehouse and they're taking the Ark of the Covenant and just putting it on a shelf.
Right.
I feel it's the same thing. So let's get back to your book. I know we've gone off a little bit, but it is part and parcel of why you wrote the book. Um, and you said this: we're not to place hope in a single person.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Well, let's talk about Trump. I'm a big Trump supporter.
Me too.
I put on a few years ago, I put on seven
Tremendous.
events. Yeah, I put on seven events. We had 45,000 people at them. Trump was there. I got to know his son Don Jr. a little bit. Every
Hmm.
major conservative you could think of, at these things. So I'm a big Trump supporter, and I want Trump to win. And I've already voted for him. We did early voting here in Tennessee, and I've already voted for him.
Us too.
And I hope that he wins.
Right.
But I also know that he's not the final answer because he's only going to be there for 4 years. They're going to treat him like a lame duck. They're going to fight him every step of the way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
here's the thing, when people say, well, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, and I say, well, Kamala Harris is a Marxist, and Marxists hate Christianity or any faith for that matter,
Right.
because if the state is God, it means you can't be following any other God. It's why China cracks down. They've got what, 1 million or 2 million Uyghurs in slave encampments.
Yeah.
What is it? The Fulong Gong, is that the name of the
Yes.
they've been
Yes.
crushing that for some time, because you can't have an alternative God, and that's
Right.
Marxism. They have to crush any alternative God because the state has to be God. Now,
Hmm.
you look at Donald Trump. I don't know Donald Trump's relationship with the Lord. He could be a real Christian. He could be a not real Christian. He could be a Christian. He could not. I don't know. Only God and Donald Trump know whether or not he has a relationship with God, or is a Christian. But I will tell you this: even if he's not, Donald Trump is a friend to Christians.
Yes.
And to Israel, and to Christians, and to people of faith. So to
Right.
me, in a way, when I'm voting for president, I don't care I care for him as a human being and as a person, but I don't care whether he has a personal relationship with the Lord in regard to him being president of the United States. I just want him to guarantee the rights of everybody else to have a personal relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that you're going to get more likely get that from Donald Trump than you are from Kamala Harris and the Marxists who lead her on.
Yeah. I agree with you on that because um, you and I talked about this earlier before we started the show, and that is I voted for Trump, but I'm more concerned with the person after Trump
Yeah.
who will keep this republic alive, not democracy, republic alive. Because it's one thing to have a president in there for 4 years who cleans house, but these people are like ants. They will get in, they hide their true identity as a Marxist, as a communist. They hide to the point where they will change their name, have a few kids later, and this kid's coming up and he's a hotshot in politics, and you don't realize he's related to them.
Yeah.
We've seen it, and so uh, it all sounds beautiful. That's the thing about Marxism. It sounds beautiful, but as uh, Thomas Sowell said, we're fixing stuff that wasn't broken.
Well, and here's the real problem with socialism and Marxism. They're like, let's just give the central power and they'll take care of everybody.
Right.
Here's the problem. And anybody who has a real faith understands the problem. One of my favorite quotes of all time is the great Catholic theologian and great writer, G.K. Chesterton. And G.K. Chesterton said, original sin is the only philosophy empirically validated by 3,500 years of human history.
Right.
So here's the problem with socialism. You have sinners running it. You have selfish, sinful people in charge of what everybody else gets or doesn't get. And it always ends up with the leader getting most of the money.
It always is, yes.
And his family. And then they human nature is such that we are always bent toward sin. And when you give somebody that kind of power, you've heard the old quote, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's what happens. That's the problem. Socialism in a perfect theoretical world, probably not so bad. The problem is people.
Well, if 200 of us got together and decided to live by a certain set of rules where we shared everything, nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's perfect because we've agreed. It's sort of like it's a one-to-one relationship. But when government steps in, the state steps in, they're like, all right, you're all arguing too much. We're just going to take everything and redistribute it. And they'll take on every dollar, give you a dime back. And in every communist country, Pete, there's only rich and poor.
Yep.
Okay. And we have a big problem, Chris. We are celebrity worshipers. I mean, you and I aren't. I treat celebrities like friends. They've become friends because I give them a hard time, like a little brother going, boom, 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 and we laugh about it. But I look at this kind of like Imelda Marcos. Here's Imelda Marcos standing there in Chanel and, $30,000 of jewelry on her neck alone. And back in those days, prices. She was flying to Germany with art exhibits to talk to Hitler, and hang out and then fly back. And then she would go amongst the peasants and go, oh my God. And the peasants would worship her. And it's like, you're poor because of her. Do you not get it? She's not coming here to be like blessing you. She's here for a photo op. Okay. Look at her. She's dressed in very expensive clothing, walking in the mud. And everybody's going, look at her. She cares about the people. No, she doesn't. This is 30 seconds of her life. She's trying to prove to you, oh, I feel so guilty for being rich because I took everybody's money. But, and this is socialism.
Celebrity worship is actually rooted in the Bible, and I'll tell you why. We read in Romans chapter 1 about how human beings have rebelled against God, and it says they began to worship the creation rather than the creator. So I believe that we are hardwired to worship. We are hardwired to worship. And I believe that we're hardwired to worship God. But when we get astray from God, we will worship anything we think is bigger, better, richer, faster, taller, whatever, right? We worship pleasure. We worship people, which is why you can look at a person who's a celebrity, total, absolute moron, and self-evident that he or she is a moron. And that person will sell out stadiums for people to come and hand them their money so that they can go live in a mansion and have fast cars, and they worship that person. It's a form of worship, and it's misdirected and misguided worship.
It's the worship of Moloch.
Absolutely.
Where we look up to somebody who's standing on a stage. I mean, I see it all the time.
Well, that's what happened with the golden calf. Moses goes up to the hill and he's gone too long. And they're like, we need something to worship. Let's melt our gold down. We'll just make a big calf. How about that? And then they start worshiping this.
Yeah. But those in power know this, because I remember when Beyonce came out at, I guess it was the Grammys, and she's dressed in this goddess golden outfit. And she looked right at the camera and she said, you're about to participate in a ritual. She actually said it. And then she
Mm.
started doing this thing. And I said, no, I'm not. And I shut the TV off and never watched it because
Yeah.
I'm like, I knew what they were doing. They're trying to indoctrinate you. And it goes into the subconscious mind. We had uh, Jason Christoff on the show. And he talked about how they manipulate people through these rituals that we just don't seem to get is a ritual
Yeah.
to indoctrinate you.
Well,
Um,
and music is a powerful thing. Movies and television are powerful because of the imagery that goes into our minds.
it's spell casting. It's
It
what it
really
is.
is. It
That's
really
why it's
is.
called broadcasting, spell casting, spell check. It's all right in
And
front of us.
there are good forms of that. I mean, if a person's singing a beautiful song, I mean, man, I'll tell you what, it's really interesting to me. I was my wife and I, we like to watch these competition shows like The
Yeah,
Voice. We like The Voice.
I do too.
Well, so here's an interesting thing. Sometimes I'll hear a singer and they're singing you've got good singers, then you've got really good singers, and then you have these world-class singers.
Yeah,
And every now and then you'll see one of these world-class singers and they'll come on and they'll start singing a song and they're obviously world-class, obviously amazing. But what happens to the heart that's in tune with God is I have gotten tears listening to a singer who I don't even know singing a song that's not even a Christian song. They're just singing a pop song. And I
yeah,
will get tears. Here's why. God made that person. That voice that they have is straight out a gift from God. And
it
so
is.
what I end up doing is I don't worship that person. I worship the God that made that person. When I see nature, I don't worship nature. I worship the God that made that nature on the palette
Yeah,
of his canvas, right? And that's what we're supposed to do. Great. I mean, Beyonce's wildly talented person. We don't
yeah,
worship Beyonce. We worship the God who created Beyonce. And frankly, Beyonce should worship the God who created Beyonce. You
yeah,
know, the people who are mathematicians and scientists, we don't worship them and science. We worship the God that created science. And
yes.
that's really the message that we need to have.
It's true. We have the message backwards sometimes. Not us, but I mean,
People. Yeah.
honestly, it took me a while
Yeah.
to discover that.
Yeah.
The majesty. When I say awesome, I mean the awe of God's majesty.
Yeah.
When I say it, it truly is that. I look out my window right now, I see the mountains, up in the hills, and I'm just like, I can't believe I live here. There's so much
Yeah.
beauty. And some people would look at me and go, in the desert, yeah, it's beautiful. Um, I want to talk about this, and this is in the book. You laid out this plan, this path, but I want to talk about the path to revival and getting back to that. How do we get back to that
Well, there's
that
a formula
place?
for it. There's actually a formula for it. There is a blueprint for it. Right after Solomon built the temple, God pulled Solomon aside and said, gave him all the lowdown. But then he also said, when things start to go bad, and he says, and it's in Second Chronicles chapter 7, if anybody wants to read this, but particularly verse 14, 2 Chronicles 7:14. God tells Solomon, when all the things go bad, and then verse 14, he says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will heal their land. So it is an if then, it's conditional. Revival is
Yeah,
conditional. God always wants to bring revival. God always wants to have an amazing relationship with us. God always wants to bless us. God always wants to, to be engaged with us.
yeah,
We're the ones who create the distance. So he
yeah,
gave us a formula. Listen, you're called by my name. You're my people. You're called by my name. But if you will just do this, if you will humble yourself, pray, seek my face, and turn from my wicked ways, then. And so that's where we stand today. And that's what the call of the book is. Will you humble yourself?
yeah.
Will you pray? Will you seek God's face? And will you turn from your wicked ways? because ultimately that's what God wants. He wants to bring us back into that holy relationship with him. And so that's the blueprint. Humble yourself, pray, seek his face, and turn from your wicked ways. Then I will hear from heaven and heal your land.
God bless you, brother. That's awesome. Powerful. And I'm just thinking of the word revive. It basically means to bring back to life.
Yeah, come to life again.
To bring back to life.
And that's why revival starts in the church. People do get converted during revivals, but revival is really about the church. And the way we see conversions is when the church comes alive, because when the church is dead, what do people outside the church do? They look at the church and go, I don't need any of that. Come on, church smirch, right? But when all of a sudden the church comes alive and they're loving people and they're feeding the poor and they're taking care of people and they're being honest and they're being prosperous and all, now they go, I want some of what he's having. And they come to God, you know. And I think that's why it's important for us to seek revival, is so that we can expand the kingdom of God to people who need God.
Pick up a copy of Chris's book, The Coming American Revival, the biblical blueprint for igniting a nation's soul. I love that. I love that. Chris, thank you for being on Awakened Nation, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
I love our conversations.
I know, they're always great.
Yeah,
they fly by. I know we get an hour, but all of a sudden you look at the clock and go, "Oh wow, we're 54 minutes into this thing."
I love you and Denise. You have pictures up of you two together and your wedding and everything. It's just a beautiful couple.
She has been a godsend into my life, and one of the greatest gifts. I had hit a real low point in my life. I'd gone through a divorce, and I had been a pastor. I got divorced after I was a pastor, 15, 20 years after, but, that was hard, and you feel like a failure and, all these things. And I'll end with this little story. I moved to Scottsdale. I was born and raised in Seattle, 50 years in Seattle. I moved to Scottsdale to get away from everything and just sort of go find myself and, whatever. And somebody said to me, you should go meet this guy. He's a Christian guy, and he's one of the top tech startup guys in the greater Phoenix area. Well, the guy was like 30 years old, like maybe 30 years old, but he had already built this big reputation as being a really strong, great Christian guy, but also being a very successful tech guy. I barely remember his name. I don't remember where we met. I don't remember the conversation. I remember one exchange with this guy, and it was a pivotal moment in my life. I was telling him my story, and I said, and now I've hit rock bottom. This is where the only thing I remember of that conversation, I said, and now I've hit rock bottom. And he leans back in his chair and he says, that's fantastic. And I said, it's fantastic that I've hit rock bottom. And he leans back in and he says, yeah, because Jesus is the rock.
Wow.
I mean, and that must have happened. I had that coffee or lunch. It must have been coffee in 2017, maybe early 2017, 7 years later. And that was the beginning of the end of my hardship, because I realized that what God was doing was God was allowing me to fail and allowing me to fall and allowing me to experience all of this pain and discomfort for one reason, so that I would turn back to God.
Wow.
And that's when my personal revival began. It didn't happen immediately after that, but it happened. And it started with that. And part of that revival and second chance was Denise coming into my life. And, and she's been amazing and an amazing relationship, and love her as my wife.
I feel that way about Tao. She and I met at a business conference, and the wisdom that came out of her mouth at that conference made me lean forward. And it didn't happen overnight. She called me a few times, we talked, and I realized these are the easiest conversations I've ever had in my life. And I was going through some dark stuff as well. And sometimes God just sends somebody into your life It's very powerful.
especially if you're asking for it and if you're positioning yourself to receive it.
It's very powerful. Thank you, my friend. I also have met Donald Trump. I was at a Forbes 80th anniversary celebration, a private celebration I got
Oh,
invited
wow.
to. And I've also met Eric. I didn't get a chance to meet Don Jr. I would love to meet Don. Eric as well. So they're a big part of living in New York. I don't know if you know that. But if
Yeah.
you live in New York City, you're going to run into
Well,
Donald Trump.
my first job out of college was in northern New Jersey
Yeah.
and in the late 80s. So there was a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
Donald Trump news going on back then.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he was fighting against government bureaucracy. If you read The Art of the Deal, the things he had to go through to get Woolman Rink, ice skating rink built,
Yep.
the government just stupidity, one page after another, where you're like, what is going on? The incompetence is what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
And Trump brought coffee out to the workers every day. He was making sure he hired rink builders from Canada to
Yep.
figure this out, which is genius, common sense genius.
Yep.
And how many times did they fail trying to build Woman Rink when Koch was, in charge? It was ridiculous. So I've run into Trump. I've seen him when the cameras aren't rolling. He's gotten out of his limousine, crossed the street in front of Trump Towers, almost getting hit by traffic just so he could talk to the construction workers
Well,
on
I'll
Fifth
tell you,
Avenue.
when
I
I
mean,
was putting on
it's,
those conferences, I spent a lot of time with Don Jr. because he would get there early and we were in the back, while speakers were speaking. And I'll tell you, he's one of the finest guys I ever met.
yeah,
He's humble. I mean, there is no pretense with that guy. No
no,
pretense whatsoever with that guy.
yeah.
And in fact, I told him one time, I said, I brag about you to my liberal friends. And he goes, why? And I go, because I know it'll make their head explode to tell them that you're like the most normal guy ever. And I'll never forget what he said to me. I was like, you're normal, you're not demanding, you're da da da. And he goes, Chris, he said, I got enough money that if I need a bowl full of M&Ms with the brown ones removed, I can bring them myself.
That's funny. And all I'm going to say is, that's tremendous. That's tremendous what you're
Tremendous.
doing. I love that. They shot me. There's a comedian who has the funniest Trump impersonation. I'll send it over to.
Shane Gillis,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, yeah. Hilarious.
Oh, he's so
I'm
funny.
Neo from the Matrix. Yeah, it was funny. And I'll send you a graphic I created. It's hilarious. Uh, Man, it's just some people will sit here and listen to this episode and go, "Oh, you guys are brainwashed." And it's like, look, I've met the guy in person. He is not coming from that position. The media has just gone crazy over
I'll
the
tell
last
you a
eight
story.
years.
I know we were going to wrap it up, but now we're kind of going again. Let me tell you a story. When I was putting on these conferences, we had a morning breakfast that was additional. So you bought your ticket to the day. If you wanted to come early and have breakfast, I think five of them were with Dinesh D'Souza and two of them were with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Well, one of the ones where Sarah Huckabee Sanders was our breakfast speaker. We had maybe 800 people in the room. And right at the front, and it was a Q&A, right? So up in the front was a guy, he was probably 35 maybe. And he said, hi, Sarah. He said, I don't know if you remember me, but my mom had cancer and we came to the White House and, we didn't have the money to pay our bills and, da, 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 da. And he said, and President Trump wrote a check and sent it to my mother and paid off all of my mother's medical bills. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah, I
And
do.
Sarah called him by name and said, yes, Joe, I remember that very specifically and blah, blah, blah. I'm glad to hear your mother's doing well and et cetera, et cetera. And she's speaking directly to him. Then she raises her head up and she talks to the entire other 800 people. And she said, and here's what I want the rest of you to know. Yes, that story took place. Absolutely 100% true. But what you don't know is and she said it just like this. She said, and that is every single day in President Trump's world. He does that kind of thing every
Yeah,
single day, and none of
yeah,
you know about it. And I remember thinking, wow,
yeah,
the people who know him best, they know the heart of compassion he has, and that he cares for people. I mean,
Yeah.
there's stories that have become legend of him paying off people's mortgages because they stopped and helped his mother fix a
Yeah.
flat tire, one night at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Like all sorts of just kind gestures that he's done.
He has. And I've heard many of them, and the media just will not cover it. Or they twist it. They twist it around. Yeah. And I have always been astounded by this, and it always happens. My friends who don't vote the way I do, and we don't get angry, we have a nice conversation, but it's 2 or 3, 4 years after they voted for that other person, they'll come to me and go, wow, I wish I knew that this was going to turn out the way it did. And I said, I warned you.
Well,
Okay.
I'll tell you, the most surprised people in America 3 years from now will be the people who vote Democrat. And here's why they will be surprised. If President Trump wins, they're going to be surprised that they're not in the gulag or the concentration camp, because that's
Yeah.
what they've been told, that they're going to
Yeah.
end up in concentration camps. They're going
Yeah.
to realize that they were lied to. Now, if Kamala wins, they're going to be surprised that she is far more radical than she is letting on to be, and
Yeah.
that they're going to have lots of terrible things happening in their lives.
Yeah.
Either way, they're going to be surprised.
Well, her family, I think it's her grandfather or her father were radical communists. They actually were
Oh, her
on
dad's a
Jamaica.
Marxist professor. Her mom and dad
Yeah.
were both Marxist professors.
Yeah. And she didn't grow up in America. She grew up in Canada, So the just follow Candace Owens and you'll get the whole breakdown on all of this. I'd love to have her on the show.
Yeah.
Um, but thank you, Chris. As you know, I go into lightning round. I don't know if you have a few more minutes. I want
Sure,
to
absolutely.
just
Let's
ask
do
you
it.
a couple of fun questions and maybe not so fun questions. Who knows? Um, what is your greatest hope for America? And I'm not talking about in the next 4 years. I'm talking 50 years from now.
My greatest hope is that America becomes what God wants it to become. You talk about the communists working on 70-year cycles. I think God works on 1,000-year cycles.
Easily,
and
easily, yeah.
God knows our history. He knows our past. He knows our future. He knows what's possible. And I hope that we get back to being that city on the hill. I hope that we
Yeah.
that we turn our hearts back to God. We realize, and again, God chose Israel in the Old Testament, and he told Israel, I didn't choose you because you're better or greater or, whatever. I chose you so that my glory could be shown through you. And
Right.
I believe that that's the same reason he chose America, was not because we're better, smarter, or we're the white people, or, none of that
Right.
stuff that everybody says. He did it so that he could show his glory to the rest of the world. And that is what we have done for
Yeah.
much of our history.
I agree with you. And ladies and gentlemen, if you ever hear somebody say that the United States is a failed experiment, walk away from that conversation because that's not true. We set the tone for the rest of the world. If you see electric grid systems, if you see people of mixed race in all over the world, if you see people from Tanzania moving to Germany, that's because of the United States. We proved without a shadow of a doubt that you give us, you're tired, you're poor, you're whatever, and we
Why
will
do you think
turn them.
there's Trump rallies all over the world?
Yeah, I know.
There's
It's
Trump
hilarious.
rallies all over the world because they know that as goes America, so goes the rest of the world.
Yeah.
We don't hold Justin Trudeau rallies down here in Chattanooga. You know, we're not holding Macron rallies here in the United States,
Yeah, that's
but they're holding
hilarious.
Trump rallies elsewhere.
You said Trudeau. That's a whole other show. He looks very similar to a Cuban dictator for
I
some
know.
reason.
I know.
My second question is, what is your favorite thing between you and Denise? I know you talked about this in our last show. You have a morning ritual,
Yeah.
but what else do you have with Denise? Because you guys are just so cute together.
Well, the
And
funny
so,
thing is, we get along really well. Denise always says, "I don't know what's more important, how much we love each other or how much we like each other."
yeah,
And we enjoy each other's company, I think one of the things that we both committed to when we got married was ending arguments fast. Because,
Yeah.
couples can end up dragging arguments out and then they go into days and days. And then, so when we get into an argument or something, we will literally go walk over to the couch, sit down on the couch and face each other, and like we will sit cross-legged on the couch facing each other, so we're taking away all sorts of body language, like, well, what
Yeah.
about you, that happens when you're standing up, right? We
Yeah.
literally sit kind of cross-legged on the couch facing each other, and we give each other permission to talk without interrupting. We hear each other, we respond. We can finish an argument in 10 minutes. And
Wow.
sometimes people will get into arguments that last days and weeks. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things that really, and it probably goes a lot towards us liking each other, because if you're not fighting that much, but we enjoy the same things. We're foodies. Tonight we're
Yeah.
going out for dinner and probably get a glass of wine, and then we're going to go see down to the Chattanooga Theater. We're going to see a play,
Nice.
and so we enjoy each other's company. I think that's very
I love
simple.
that about you guys. I really do. I
Oh,
can
thanks.
see it in your eyes, their love. Um, yeah, and that's a committed relationship. That's what happens in a God-centered relationship. You're
Absolutely.
you're gonna argue if you're passionate
For
people, and
sure.
I find sometimes the arguments make you much, much better. They do. They really do.
People say every now and then you hear something, I've been married 40 years and my wife and I've never had an argument. And you know what my first thought is? I'm sorry you have such a bad marriage.
It's boring and it probably hasn't grown.
Well,
I
and
know.
probably what it is both people are repressing their feelings.
Yeah, yeah,
They're not living an emotionally authentic life with their spouse.
yeah,
They're covering it up and they're squelching it and they're repressing it in order to get the relationship they think they want. But
yeah.
the best thing to create that relationship is to hash it out and to resolve it uh, properly.
You said it, man. You said it. And my third and final question is for you. You're not just a Christian man, you're a man who self reflects. This is what I love about you. You self reflect, you look within, and you go, oh, I screwed up. What was the biggest lie or the biggest thing you had to work on for yourself to grow?
Well, my dad died when I was 4. And so I grew up without a father. My mother had borderline personality disorder. We moved a lot, 28 homes, 11 different schools. She shipped me off to live with relatives twice, once in the 4th grade, once in the 9th grade. And so I had a lot of instability and a lot of a sense of, does somebody love me? And I found out later that my dad didn't want me. I'm 9 years younger than my closest sibling. And my dad was in and out of the house, and I was conceived on a good weekend. And so, but he didn't want me, probably because he realized they were going to end up divorced, and then he died before they could get divorced. And I was broken growing up, thinking, because my dad didn't leave me a single thing. He didn't leave me a picture. He didn't leave me a note. I'm sorry, I'm going to die. He had 6 months to die. I mean, he didn't just die out of the blue. He had cancer and took 6 months. He had plenty of time to write me a note, or a
Yeah,
letter, or leave a picture, or anything. Um, and I think probably my biggest struggle in my life has been that I have tried to please others in order to be liked and approved of, and all these things. The problem is, I realized this back during COVID. I tell people I realized something about myself. I have two conflicting character traits, and they are in conflict with one another. On
hmm,
one hand, I want everybody to like me. On the other hand, I can't keep my opinion to myself. And then and so I end up with a lot of people who don't like me because I can't keep my opinion to myself. And so I think I think really probably one of the best things for me was just really realizing, and it's sad to me that I had to be in my 50s before I finally really internalized this. And that is, the only person that matters is God. If
yeah,
God approves of how I'm living my life, then I'm good. And then
yeah,
of course you want it to spill over to your family. You want your family to respect you and to love you, and to think well of you. um no, I think that's probably been the biggest self-reflection that's changed my life is it's allowed me to be the person I am and let the chips fall where they may.
Wow. Wisdom from Mr. Chris Widener. Thank you so much for being on
Thanks
Awaken
for having me.
Nation. One more time, man. We're going to keep having you on each season because these are deep conversations, my friend, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on and the fact that you can have that deep conversation. Sometimes you get somebody on the other side of the computer, can't have that deep conversation with you, but you can.
To pull it out. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. Wow. It's just beautiful to have you on, man. So, hey, everybody, pick up Chris's book and all his other books, man. They are well written. I have a few on my shelf as well. But this new book, The Coming American Revival, the biblical blueprint for igniting a nation's soul, this has impact at a whole other level. Pick up a copy, please. Where should they go to get the book? Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or your website?
ComingAmericanRevival.com. Just go to ComingAmericanRevival.com. That'll take you straight into the Amazon. You won't have to search for it. If you want, if you're not an Amazon fan, your Barnes and Noble, it's there too, but you can find it. We actually rushed it to print. It's not in bookstores yet. We put it completely up online. We have an audio version. We have the Kindle version. We have the Nook, I think it's called, with Barnes and Noble, and then we have the paperback version, which will be sent to people, but it's not in bookstores right now because I only wrote this 4 months ago, and usually with a traditional publisher, the cycle is 18 months.
Yeah,
and my publisher said we need this out before the election.
I agree. Thank you for doing that. Also, Chris is the co-founder of the Red Referral Network. We talked about that on the last episode. Enough. I titled that. It helps conservatives not be canceled. So you get to hang out with some people and also start probably a group in your state that is conservative. So please check those out. Once again, thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. Hey, everybody, don't forget to tune in next week. We're going to have another extraordinary guest here on Awakened Nation. Until then, bye-bye for now. Thank you so much for being a big part of the Awakened Nation movement. This is how you can help me and our extraordinary guests. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share this episode out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And let's grow this movement by word of mouth. Our success is because of you. Thank you, and see you next week.